I didn't raise my voice that night. I didn't argue. I didn't even lift a finger. In the oak-paneled dining room of my parents' suburban Chicago home, under the expensive crystal chandelier, I just sat, motionless. I watched Chloe, my 6-year-old daughter, shrinking into the oversized velvet chair, her tiny hands trying to cover the pale pink hearing device behind her left ear. Across from us, Vanessa, my sister, was throwing her head back, laughing. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was sharp, piercing, clashing with the sterling silver cutlery on the table to create a chaotic, headache-inducing noise. She had just pointed at Chloe's ear and cracked a cruel joke about her being a robot. And my father, a man who always prided himself on family lineage, just waved it off like it was harmless gossip. "Oh, come on, it's just a joke," he said, taking a sip of vintage red wine. The smiles stayed plastered on their faces. The clinking of forks against bone china continued. I stayed silent. But Ethan didn't. My husband pushed his chair back and stood up. The sound of the chair legs scraping against the hardwood floor was harsh, completely cutting through the fake atmosphere in the room. He didn't say a word. No goodbye. No explanation. He walked straight to the front door and opened it. A simple action, but it drew an absolute line in the sand. My family watched him go, bewildered. But they didn't know this. My silence tonight was more dangerous than any screaming match. By tomorrow morning, this silence would take away everything they were currently enjoying. My name is Audrey. I'm in my late 30s, a mother, a wife, and the invisible person in my own family. Since childhood, I was always the compliant one, the first to arrive to clean up, and the last to leave after washing the dirty dishes. If you passed me on the streets of Chicago, you wouldn't see anything special. Simple off-the-rack clothes, no Cartier jewelry or shiny Hermès bags, and a face so calm people often mistook it for weakness. I let them think that. Because being underestimated is my perfect camouflage. That night, I had been in the kitchen since noon preparing the dinner party. The steady hum of the exhaust hood was a familiar background noise I used to drown out dark thoughts. Chloe sat next to me, legs swinging under the chair, tiny fingers tracing the high-tech hearing aid hidden behind her ear. She had only been wearing it for a few weeks. Every morning before school, Chloe would stand in front of the mirror, tilt her head, and ask nervously, "Mommy, does it look weird?" And every morning I looked her in the eye and told the truth. It looks like you. Strong and beautiful. Chloe is 6, curious but vulnerable. Her world of sound is different, and she's learning to trust her hearing again. We practiced for hours at the kitchen table, the click of a ballpoint pen, the beep of the oven, and my whispering voice. Tonight, Chloe wanted everyone to see how brave she was. But my family, people who consider themselves high society, have no room for imperfections. They view physical perfection as the only measure of a person's worth. The funniest part is they had no idea that the ordinary woman sitting silently in front of them held the only key to their entire extravagant existence. Vanessa arrived 30 minutes late. The sound of high heels striking the foyer floor announced her arrival before the door even opened. She walked in with a gust of cold air and the smell of heavy perfume, her sharp eyes scanning the room like an appraiser looking for cracks in an antique. My parents immediately changed their attitude, backs straighter, smiles brighter, as if the queen had just arrived. At first, the conversation revolved around safe topics: the stock market, the upcoming vacation in Aspen, or my brother's new car. Chloe huddled close to me, whispering every time she heard her name mentioned, her face lighting up whenever she caught a word thanks to her new device. But then, Vanessa noticed it. She didn't ask quietly. She didn't lower her voice. Vanessa pointed a manicured finger straight at my daughter's ear, tilted her head, and flashed the smile I've always hated, the smile of a predator toying with its prey. "What is that thing on her ear?" she asked, her voice echoing across the dining table. The room dropped. Not an awkward silence, but an expectant silence waiting for a show. I answered immediately, my voice calm and clear. I explained it was a new high-tech hearing aid, helping Chloe hear high frequencies she had lost. I foolishly believed the clarity of science would extinguish the scrutiny. But Vanessa just clicked her tongue and shook her head. "It's so small. It looks really sad. Don't you think?" The word sad hung in the air like toxic smoke. My mother took a sip of water, set the glass down too carefully, and added, "People will stare. Kids are so mean these days." I wanted to scream that the only person being mean was her. But I took a deep breath, counting silently in my head. I was used to swallowing anger to keep the peace. But this time, when I saw Chloe bring her hand up to cover her ear like she had done something wrong, I knew my patience had reached its final limit. I tried. God knows I tried to keep my voice from shaking. I put my fork down, looked straight at Vanessa, and explained one more time. Not with emotion, but with cold facts. The only language this family seemed to respect. I talked about audio frequency ranges, about hearing recovery, about how this technology wasn't a decoration, but Chloe's bridge to the world. But my words fell on deaf ears. My father let out a long sigh, a sound full of boredom. He leaned back in his chair, loosening his silk tie. "Come on, Audrey, you're being dramatic. Vanessa was just making an objective observation. Don't always be so sensitive. This is a family dinner, not a medical seminar." "Exactly," Vanessa chimed in, smirking now that she had an ally. "I'm just saying it looks a little different. You know, kids at private school are brutal. I'm just worried about Chloe." Worried? The fakeness in her voice made my stomach churn. But the worst part wasn't their mockery. The worst part was feeling Chloe's small hand pull away from mine. She bowed her head over her plate, her shoulders shaking slightly. Chloe turned to me, whispering in that tiny voice she uses when she's scared. "Mommy, did I do something wrong? Should I take it off?" That question was like a knife straight to my heart. In that moment, every reason, every bit of patience I had built up over the years, shattered completely. They weren't just insulting me, they were breaking a 6-year-old spirit right in front of me, and they called it family. I looked around the table. My mother was busy wiping an invisible stain off the tablecloth. My father was pouring more wine. No one cared. No one saw the pain in Chloe's eyes. And that was when I knew. Peace was no longer an option. Have you ever been in a situation like Audrey, when your child's pain was treated as a joke by relatives? If you've ever had to hold your tongue for the sake of family, comment, "I understand," below this video, and keep watching to see Audrey's brilliant revenge. I didn't answer Chloe immediately. Instead, I placed my hand over her trembling one, transferring the warmth and stability that this entire room lacked. I looked around the table one last time. Vanessa's impatient face, the condescending, expectant looks from my parents. They were waiting for me to laugh it off, waiting for me to say the familiar, "It's okay," to wipe away the discomfort. I realized that if I spoke up now, everything would just slide off them like water off a duck's back. Respect isn't something you can beg for from people who are deaf to the feelings of others. Suddenly, the harsh sound of a wooden chair scraping the floor cut through my thoughts. It was Ethan. He didn't slam the table. He didn't throw his napkin. He just stood up, adjusting his suit cuffs with a terrifying calmness. He looked straight into my father's eyes, then glanced past Vanessa, his gaze cold as an iceberg. "Get out," Ethan said to us. Just 2 words. Concise. Not a suggestion. He turned and walked to the front door. He didn't look back. The sound of the door slamming shut behind him wasn't loud, but the weight of it made the air in the room feel solid. Vanessa rolled her eyes and clicked her tongue. God, so dramatic. What is wrong with him? We were just talking. My mother smiled awkwardly, trying to salvage the mood. He's probably just tired. Men get touchy over small things. They went back to their steak as if nothing happened. They thought Ethan leaving was just a minor interruption in their perfect play. They saw me still sitting there, and they assumed I had chosen their side. They were wrong. I didn't stay because I was submissive. I stayed because I wanted to memorize this moment perfectly, the last moment they were allowed to feel safe before I pulled the rug out from under them. That night, after Ethan had soothed Chloe to sleep and ensured her breathing was steady again, I went downstairs alone. I didn't turn on the main lights. The only light in the large living room came from the dim street lamp outside filtering through the French windows, casting long, ghostly shadows on the floor. I sat at the desk in the corner of the room, the spot my family mockingly called Audrey's housewife corner, where I paid utility bills and planned dinner menus. They were terribly mistaken. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed bright, illuminating my emotionless face. I opened an encrypted Excel spreadsheet, something I had been silently building for 8 years. No one knew that this boring housewife was actually a senior consultant in the medical tech field, managing an investment portfolio large enough to buy the entire block my parents lived on. On the screen were rows of automated payment commands. St. Jude Private School, tuition for Vanessa's twins. Oakwood Golf Club, Dad's platinum membership fees. Mercy Medical Center, Mom's expensive therapy treatments. Small business loan, my brother's failing boutique. Line by line, I moved the mouse to the status column. I didn't feel angry. The hot anger had cooled down, crystallizing into a pure ruthlessness. I felt powerful. They mocked my daughter's ears, but they lived off the labor of my hands. Click. Cancel transfer to Vanessa. Click. Terminate insurance payment for Dad. Click. Recall loan capital for my brother. There were no explosions, no screaming scenes. The collapse of their fake empire began with just dry mouse clicks in the silent night. When I closed the laptop, the house was still quiet. But I knew, when the sun rose, their world would burn. Dawn broke, bringing brilliant light into our marble kitchen, but it brought no peace to my parents' house. For them, this was the morning of the apocalypse. The clock struck 7 a.m. I stood barefoot on the cool floor, pouring milk into a bowl of cereal for Chloe. She was swinging her legs, humming a happy tune she had just heard on TV, a crisp sound she had never perceived so clearly before. Ethan sat opposite, sipping black coffee, eyes scanning the digital newspaper, but I knew what he was waiting for. My iPhone, sitting on the granite counter, began to vibrate violently. At first, just one text, then two. Then the screen lit up continuously like an emergency beacon. Notifications piled up, fighting for space. Transaction declined, Amex credit card, ending 8890. Warning, tuition overdue, St. Jude School. 5 missed calls from Mom. 3 missed calls from Vanessa. The vibrating sound of the phone droned on, sounding like the heartbeat of a wounded, panicked animal. It was the sound of people used to being carried suddenly having their life support cut off. Ethan glanced at the phone dancing on the table, then at me. He raised an eyebrow slightly, a half smile passing his lips. It's starting? I didn't answer, just shook my head slightly and continued drinking my coffee. Chloe looked up, tilting her head. Someone is calling you, Mommy. Aren't you going to answer? No, sweetie. I smiled, stroking her hair. It's just spam calls. It can wait. I took my time walking Chloe to the school bus. When I returned to the house, the silence was gone. Digital panic had completely taken over. Dozens of angry voicemails, a flood of red flag emails. I sat down in the armchair, taking a deep breath. The air in the house felt thick, charged with electricity, waiting for the real storm to make landfall when I picked up the phone. And I was ready to be the eye of the storm. The next call came from Vanessa. I picked up on the third ring, hit the speaker button, and placed the phone on the oak table, my hand leisurely turning a page of an architectural magazine. "What the hell did you do?" Vanessa's voice hissed, distorted by rage and panic. No greeting, no checking in, just naked entitlement. "Good morning, Vanessa," I replied, my voice as steady as an automated operator. "You're referring to the notice from St. Jude, I assume? They said the check bounced. They said the checking account was closed." She screamed, her panting echoing through the speaker. "There must be a mistake. You have to call the bank right now. I can't let my kids get kicked out of school." I took a sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch for 3 seconds, long enough for Vanessa to feel suffocated. "There is no mistake," I said, every word distinct. "I canceled the recurring payment orders. All of them." The other end went dead silent. The silence of shock. Then came a forced, skeptical laugh. "You? What do you mean? You don't have money. You're just... You never asked what I do, did you?" I cut her off, my voice ice cold. "I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Polaris MedTech. That $50,000 tuition per year for your 2 kids? That was my money. For the last 4 years." Vanessa's breathing stopped. This truth was too big for her narrow brain to process immediately. "But why?" "Because last night you said Chloe's hearing aid looked sad," I whispered, but the words were sharp as a razor. "You know what's sadder, Vanessa? Explaining to your high society parent group why you can no longer afford that wealthy label." "Audrey, wait. I was just joking." I hung up. The dial tone had never sounded so sweet. Right after I hung up on Vanessa, the name Dad popped up on the screen. Unlike my sister's hysteria, my father's voice was deep and murky, carrying the weight of disappointment, the weapon he always used to control me as a child. "Audrey," he said, no greeting. "Your mother is crying. The plastic surgeon's office just called to cancel her appointment. The Oakwood Golf Club also notified me my membership is frozen. What kind of game are you playing?" "I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago," I replied, idly swirling my coffee cup. "I'm cutting off the supply." A long pause followed. His heavy sigh echoed. "Because of dinner last night? Because of a harmless joke? You're punishing the whole family just because you're too sensitive?" "Sensitive?" I laughed softly, a dry sound. "Dad, Chloe asked me if she was broken. That wasn't a joke. That was cruelty wrapped in sugar." "We are family," he growled. "Family covers for each other." "Family?" I interrupted, my voice becoming sharp as a scalpel. "Family doesn't mock a child's disability. Family doesn't hide debt so their youngest daughter has to quietly pay it off for 8 years. You never asked where the money came from. You never asked how hard I worked. You only cared if the check arrived on time." At the same time, a desperate text from my brother appeared. "The bank just called about foreclosing on the collateral. Audrey, please, it's a system error, right?" I looked at the message, then answered my father one last time. "Love isn't what you say after you've hurt someone. It's how you act in the moment." And last night, everyone's actions said it all. I hung up and blocked all 3 of their numbers. In the sun-drenched kitchen, I had never felt lighter. The golden chain I had placed around my own neck had finally snapped. If you were Audrey, what would you do when you got the call from your dad? Would you soften up and forgive them, or stand your ground? Hit like if you agree that respect must come before financial help. The days that followed went exactly as I predicted, brutal and irreversible. No one dared to call me back to beg for the payments to be reinstated. They understood that the silence they used to look down on was the only thing holding their world together. And once I spoke up, there was no going back. The consequences didn't hit all at once. They soaked in like poison. I heard Vanessa had to transfer her kids mid-semester. The image of her, the woman who always criticized economy cars, now having to drive an old minivan to pick up her kids at a public school, avoiding the gaze of former parents, was a sweeter punishment than any scolding. My father sold his new Lexus. He stopped showing up at the Oakwood Golf Club, where he used to brag about his phantom success. Now he spends his days in a large but empty house, facing utility bills he hadn't had to worry about for a decade. My mother had to switch to basic health insurance, waiting for hours in the crowded clinics she used to despise. They lost the luxury. But more importantly, they lost control over me. As for me, I didn't keep that money. I transferred the entire budget I used to use to freeload my family into a scholarship fund for deaf children. That was my way of laundering that money clean. One afternoon, Chloe ran home, threw her backpack on the sofa, and bragged to me, "Mommy, today my friend said my device looks like a spy headset." She laughed loudly, a confident laugh, no longer afraid. Ethan stood leaning against the doorframe, watching us and smiling. In that moment, I realized I had won. Not because I made my family suffer, but because I protected this smile. Boundaries don't break families. They just filter who actually deserves to stay. If you are carrying people who don't appreciate you, remember, sometimes loving yourself means daring to cut the supply cord. Hit like if you agree, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story.